Mike as a defensive end? Because I think he was listed as a tackle.
Yeah, for how we project him as
On
being
the
defensive.
3-4, it's an end, and the 4-3, it's a tackle, but it's the same spot.
Similar spot as Mo.
Yes.
He's an older player, and he's considered raw. So he doesn't have a ton of time to develop in the NFL, but it sounds like he has a lot of development to do.
Well, I would say simply, he may be slightly older than your average prospect, but if you go back over the history in the NFL, you'll see guys that are, out of BYU and other things. He has a bit of a different story than most guys, but he is, we felt a very talented guy with a lot of upside, and we still think he has a lot of good football left in him. I don't necessarily think he is, an older player. It's not like he's 28 or 29 years old. He's still going to be a, fairly young guy, and we think he has a lot of not only potential to develop, but we don't feel he's very, far off from fulfilling that potential.
When did he kind of get on your radar? Obviously, Fort Hays State is not
A common destination of.
on Saturday night on ABC.
He was a kid. Obviously, we knew about him when we went out in the fall. Our college scouts went in there, liked him. We had a few of our scouts go in there and see him. Then, and of course, my first exposure of him really was at the Senior Bowl, and where he came in and actually practiced and wasn't able to play in the game, unfortunately, but came into practices and did quite well. In fact, it was had he maybe played in the game, that would have been a nice additional exposure on him. But we actually felt he showed quite well at the Senior Bowl, so that kind of put him on our radar. And then obviously we had the Indianapolis Scouting Combine. Went there again, another environment where he had a chance to perform and did exceptionally well. And then he went to, we had a pro day, which we attended with our coaches. So he was a guy these are the guys that you kind of get excited about, that they're, although maybe slightly older, they're kind of interesting guys that aren't in the normal path of high school to college and big programs and stuff like that. Obviously he came from Canada, had an interesting sort of start to his career where he actually took a little time and worked, and when you find a guy who's sort of overcome a lot of things like that and really sort of persevered, he had a lot of things that we felt from a character standpoint, if we're going to invest in a guy that maybe had a different path than somewhere else, we think he has a lot of potential, but not only that, the sort of the character and work ethic to kind of fulfill it. On a side note, he is Canadian. My wife is Canadian, so that was no, I'm just joking. But no, he's a guy we like quite a bit, so it's actually funny talking to him. He's from the Toronto area, where my wife is from, actually. So it's kind of comparing notes when he came in here for a 30. We had him in for a 30 visit, and it was kind of funny talking about Canada a little bit. It was kind of a nice little connection with him.
Isn't that a significant chunk of time, though? He's going to be 25, basically, when the season starts, or whatever, a month later. So when we're talking about a 4-year period where, that he's not going to have, he's going to be 30 fairly soon.
Well, it's still 5 years of playing time in the NFL. It's still a significant amount of time. So I mean, yeah, I mean, a lot of kids who actually redshirt coming out of college, and they're 22 going on 23. So it's really only a 2-year difference. But again, you weigh it with the ability and the potential. I feel good about it. I think the guy has tremendous upside. So I'm kind of excited to see how he does. And he went to an environment where he showed well, and we kind of compared him to other players around there. We felt good about the investment, good about the risk. I really don't feel he's too old of an investment for a draft pick.
Todd, when you like you said, just going over and reading the scouting reports and stuff that people have written about, they do say he's very raw. But when you look at him on the film, do you think he's maybe a little more pro-ready than some people think, that he's closer to being?
Yeah, I definitely believe he's a lot more pro-ready than a lot of people think. When they say raw, they don't mean years away. He may need some weeks or even camp or training camp, but he'll definitely play in the rotation. He's got heavy hands. He's quick off the ball. He stays low, and he's got a great drive. So he'll be ready. He'll be ready once he goes to training camp.
Todd, what do you think of his 2 years away? Because he had talked about he worked a lot of different jobs, just trying to get money to go back to school. What do you think of those 2 years away? I'm assuming you're talking about that.
Well, I mean, for him, I think it's great. If he was determined to make money and go to work and go back to school because he was driven, is outstanding. Obviously, things happen out in the real world that you have to take responsibility for. He took his responsibility. He was driven to go back, and he made something of himself, and I'm actually proud of the guy.
How do you view him as a pass rusher and his pass rushing skills?
He's got heavy hands. He's got some quickness to him. He can use some technique work, but we'll work on that.
The
I think he said he's 315, which seems a little heavier for a 34 defenseman. So you maybe want him to cut some weight, or is he good with where he's at?
Well, when he came on a visit, he was good where he is. Obviously, training camp will cut about 5 pounds off of him. As long as he can carry it and he can move, we're good with that.
And he's a pretty, I mean, again, in terms of how he carries his weight, he's a pretty well put together guy. From that standpoint, if he's 315 and athletic, that should be plenty functional for us.
How critical was the Senior Bowl considering the talent level he was playing against in college?
Yeah, that's always a great environment. I mean, obviously, you see a lot of the Division 1A kids, and they all kind of, you see them in the school call. I mean, you see them when you go to the schools, you see them play constantly, and it's sort of the, kind of comparing apples to apples. But when you get a kid that comes from a lower level competition and goes into that environment, and you get a chance to see him against better competition than he probably faced in his collegiate tape, that always makes from our standpoint, there's always a degree of risk when we're trying to judge these guys and trying to speculate on how they can develop and perform. But when he goes into those environments and shows very well, that's what you're looking for. You don't want him to just go in there and look like every other guy, but it was kind of a shame he didn't get a chance to play in the game, but he actually did some really good things in that. And of course, we watched all the practice tape on him and stuff like that when we evaluated him.
We'll do a couple more.
I mean, a couple years ago when you had Sheldon, Moe, and Leonard, it was hard for offensive lines to kind of double team just one guy. Now that you have Leonard, he's an obvious target for double teams. Is this a guy who you view as can take away some of that attention from Leonard?
Well, you got to help him scheme with that as far as taking away from Leonard, taking the attention away from Leonard. But he is a guy that gets off the ball with heavy hands that can definitely help with that.
Wait, did you inquire about trading up in second or third round?
I think we looked into it a little bit this year. I mean, we called ahead of us. I think we do, and we do this kind of every year. We go through and you sort of have packets of players. You kind of sort of see where you're at. You see who may kind of fall to you. There a couple of times we looked to kind of maybe get into the back of the second round, but of course some players that we were targeting got drafted, and we weren't able to kind of facilitate something that would kind of work for us. But we also, where we're sitting at our pick, there's also opportunities to move back. But we felt at that point in time, with the offers we had on the table, sometimes you have offers that are good, sometimes you have offers that are maybe not really what you feel are market value. So we sat tight and kind of took the player. We felt good about the player we took.
The last one.
As you got to know his story, which is kind of amazing, Simon Fraser, nursery,
Construction, and yep.
teaching facility, Fort Hays. Was there a moment you guys looked at each other and kind of had like a wow moment about where this guy came from and where he is?
I don't know if we actually looked at each other and did that. No, I'm just joking. I think like it's sometimes okay when you get very objective and you're analytical and you evaluate these things, and then you come across guys who have a different path, and we see the guys that have overcome adversity, and then it's they've worked through that process, they've stayed diligent, they haven't fallen to the wayside. And of course, even if they're at Fort Hays State, I don't know if you guys ever been to Fort Hays State. I've actually been there a few times on scouting trips. It's like literally in the middle of Kansas. Sal, I don't know if you know where exactly that is or not, but it's quite out of the way. And so I always tell guys all the time in the process, it's, if you're good enough or you go someplace, the NFL, we're so thorough in terms of how we spread our net to look for people and prospects and players. We find guys. And this is, when you kind of put his whole story together, yes, he's slightly older, but it's not for the wrong reasons. It's the fact that maybe life kind of threw him some curves and he sort of dealt with it and persevered. And I mean, when you think about it, he went from Fort Hays State eventually to the Senior Bowl, which is an accomplishment for a lot of players, especially not Division 1A players. From that to get invited to the Indianapolis Scouting Combine, and from that to go, have a number of teams bring him in for visits, personal workouts, and of course, eventually get drafted in the third round in the NFL. It's not every path is the same for a lot of these guys, but the fact that he overcame a lot of those things and persevered and has the ability and potential and will now have an opportunity to go out there and potentially be an NFL football player. It's kind of a nice story.
All right, thank you very much.
Cal had no idea what a plant nursery was.